Now, Elizondo has filed a complaint with the Pentagon's Inspector General, and in that complaint, he says the Pentagon is waging a coordinated disinformation campaign to smear him for talking about this subject. Lou Elizondo joins us. Lou, thanks so much for coming on. What do you believe the Pentagon? Thank you. What are they doing to you, and why?
Well, there are certainly pockets of resistance within the Pentagon, and my concern is that they're not being forthcoming with the American people about the reality of the program, the findings of the program, my role in the program, and frankly, the importance of this topic from a national security perspective. I think the concern for me is that there's a lot of information that still has to see the light of day, and they're obfuscating the truth. And more importantly, they may be doing it to Congress, which is a whole nother level of deception, of course, if that is indeed the case.
Yeah, and it's also illegal. They're required by law to release this information to the Congress and to the public. When can we expect that, and how convinced are you that they're going to be withholding critical information from that report?
Yeah, two things with that, Tucker. The report can come out any day, probably anytime between next week and June 25th. Hopefully the report is what Congress expects and, frankly, what Congress deserves. But I'll tell you something of equal importance that I think our friends in Congress should probably be aware of, and that is the Public Affairs Office right now in the United States Pentagon is obfuscating and, more importantly, interfering with the Freedom of Information Act process. That is something that is in law. So I think that's something every American should be concerned with.
Yeah, it's illegal, among other things, and wrong. What specifically do you worry they will omit from this report?
Well, look, in the program ATIP that I was part of, we looked at a lot of things. Primarily, as most people know, the UAP, or the unidentified aerial phenomenon topic, and more importantly, the incursions into U.S. airspace. There's a lot of data, Tucker, out there, and I mean there's a lot, and I have to be very careful what I say, but I think if just some of that information comes to light, one thing, people look at the Nimitz incident, they look at the Roosevelt, they look at the kid in the Omaha, and they say, well, those are anecdotal, those are events that occurred every so often. But I think Americans would be really surprised to know that these events are continuing to literally last week. They're happening all the time.
And you worry that the report will underplay that as a kind of CYA move from DOD?
Look, we can laugh all day long about the topic of UFOs or UAPs, but the bottom line is you have objects that are coming unimpeded into U.S. airspace, controlled U.S. airspace. And I know some politicians think it's a laughing matter, but at the end of the day, we have controlled U.S. airspace over Washington, D.C. for a very specific reason. If it's nobody's concern, then why are we spending millions of dollars protecting the airspace when these things have the ability to fly unimpeded in those airspaces? More importantly, you have men and women in uniform, brave men and women in uniform, that are reporting these things, and for some reason there's some people in I guess politics who don't think it's such a big deal.
Last question: do you think if DOD does keep this information from the Congress and from the public, that some within the Defense Department will leak it, will tell us what they're hiding?
I never condone leaking. I still have my security oath, and that's something I would never encourage anybody to do. I think there's a right way to do this, and I think so far is to have the conversation the way we've been having it and use the Inspector General process to our advantage. It's there for a reason, and the IG is there to conduct an evaluation and a fair assessment. Hopefully they do that. I have faith and confidence in the fine men and women that are in the IG shop, so let's hope that they do what they're supposed to do and they do the right thing.
I hope you're right. We'll see you soon, I suspect. Lou Elizondo, thanks a lot.
Yes, sir.